Matthew, son of Alphaeus.
Yes.
Follow me.
Brothers and sisters, welcome back to the Behaviour Revolution. And we've been working on some scriptures for a while now, and we've been taking a bit of a hiatus. We've been dealing with real personal issues and looking at ourselves. Yahusha's really been putting the mirror up to us and showing us what our true behaviours are. That's what he's doing in the bride, the real bride anyway. Anyway, about 5 months ago, we started this book of Matthew and we got halfway through chapter 1, and then all sorts of chaos happened, and Yahusha dropped bombs all over us, and we left the assembly and we got rid of all that, and we could see his clear path of what he wants us to do, transitioning into him as Elohim. As he changed, we need to follow him and actually change. We need to change. And so that was really catastrophic and really violent between us, and we want to change, we want to overcome. But what I also want to do is, as we get closer to Yahusha and closer to each other, I've said to Therese, I'd like to get into the Word some more, because not only for ourselves, I mean, we're in the Word here like all the time, but actually reading it ourselves. And also, nobody's feeding the sheep. There's no one out there, not that I see, who's saying anything particularly healthy to uplift and encourage and feed my sheep, Yahusha said. If you love me, feed my sheep. So we've been through all the roller coaster of whether we should speak, whether we're even worthy to speak. Look at how we've behaved. Why the hell would he want to use us? You get to a point where you go, stuff it. No one else is saying it. No one else knows it. He's chosen us. So let's say it. So we're going to start going through, as well as all these other things we've been doing, we're going to start going through this book of Matthew, because I think it's fascinating looking at the life of Yahusha. What better role model to look at? So we went through, and I'll just leave a link under the video to the first half of this chapter. I won't take you through the study we did again. It was 5 months ago, and you can catch up on that if you want to. Look at that link. We're going to keep going now in Matthew chapter 1, because it's all about Yahusha. The first half we dealt with was just about the genealogy, all the different generations, and all the different names and people and fascinating things that were in the first half of Matthew chapter 1. We want to continue Matthew chapter 1 today here by talking about his birth, because this is a really interesting, and it all comes down to love, of course, which is our goal.
Yeah.
This is how the birth of Yahusha the Messiah happened. If you want to say stuff as we go along, just tell me to shut up and go for it, to speak. This is how the birth of Yahusha the Messiah happened. His mother Mary was engaged to marry Joseph. But before they married, he learned that she was pregnant by the power of Elohim's spirit. This is where Yahuah dumped his old self and his old name and metamorphed into a brand new creation for deliverance. We know that. A lot of people are struggling with that, but we know that. We can see that. So this is where Yahusha was formed. This is where Yahuah morphed into a human being, flesh. And we've got a few little notes on the side here that are very interesting things to go into. What's this whole immaculate conception? Because the whole born of the Virgin Mary has sparked so much controversy over the years. Often we hear the term immaculate conception in regards to this event. And in effect, this is conflating two entirely different things. The Immaculate Conception is purely Roman Catholic doctrine that has little to do with the birth of Yahusha. Rather, it is a doctrine held as a core belief that the Virgin Mary was herself conceived by a divine miracle that made her free from sin. Where does the scripture say that?
It doesn't.
So in many respects, the thought is that Mary conceived her son in the same way she was conceived. In Roman Catholicism, this allows for elevating Mary beyond normal human status to the semi-divine nonsense. And we all know that the mother and son and spirit and the whole Trinity aspect comes from Babylon. It's just been rehashed and resynchronized in every single movement, really.
Yeah.
So that's the first interesting thing here. Mary conceived. Her real name is Miriam, but we're calling her Mary. Make it easy. Her name is Mary, and she conceived, it says here, by the power of Elohim's Spirit, not by the seed of a man. And we know that the seed is what possesses the blood. The blood from the man, from the sperm, is what possesses the seed, which is the blood of the child. The bones and the flesh and everything else come from the woman, but the seed to germinate the egg comes from the man. So in this aspect, there was no fleshly man, was there? So it means his seed was from Elohim, and we know it was Elohim. But the main thrust of this study today is going to be about this whole idea of Jewish betrothal, because it's fascinating. Matthew takes us on perhaps the most controversial aspect of Yahusha's birth situation, if not of his entire life, explaining that although Joseph and Mary were engaged, they were not yet married. Yet Mary had become pregnant. This was a terrible scandal within the Jewish community. It'd be a terrible scandal today in our Western society, but imagine it back here in an Eastern society. Many translations use the word engaged. Many translations do use the word engaged. They're engaged to be married, because it's just easy to understand. They use the word engaged to describe the relationship between Joseph and Mary. However, a better word is betrothed, because the word engaged in the modern Western world today doesn't carry the same sense as the word betrothed in ancient times. Engaged is an arrangement whereby a man and a woman agree at some point to become married. Engagements are broken all the time, and other than a typical emotional toll it causes, little other harm is done. You know, you might break each other's hearts and decide not to get married. That's generally the gift. That's generally it. Little other harm is done. Betrothal, however, is another matter altogether. It's not an engagement, it's a betrothal. Because betrothal in Hebrew culture was a solemn promise, sealed with a commitment in which the male and female bound themselves together by a marriage contract. It's literally a marriage. It's step one of a marriage contract that was signed, sealed, and delivered at the moment of betrothal. And you can see the picture there. It's very serious. They're standing in front of the father or a priest or somebody official to do this. And this is just betrothal. So the way we think of marriage in modern times in the West here actually occurred at the time of betrothal among the Hebrews in ancient times. The only thing left to be done, that in Hebrew culture was called marriage, was when the bride moved into the house of the groom and they consummated their union, sex. It was the norm that after the father of the bride agreed to the formal marriage contract, the woman was now called a wife. Even so, she typically continued to live under her father's roof for about another year. So betrothal is very different to our understanding of engagement today. The union was considered to be so completed that if the betrothed husband were to die, the woman was considered a widow. So essentially, the physical consummation was little more than a private ritual. Since the woman was already legally a wife, then cheating during betrothal was adultery, and not merely an indiscretion as it is treated today in the West.
Well, if you have a look in today's society, adultery, they don't even consider it being wrong or anything like that. They do it when they've already taken their marriage vows and they think, oh yeah, it doesn't matter. So, you look at the world today and it's just all over the shop. I mean, you've got men marrying men, women marrying women, and all sorts of wrong going on.
Yeah.
And constantly, the woman's never allowed to divorce a man, but the man can go and do whatever the heck he likes according to him, and the woman has to just put up with it. Well, I don't agree with that, because if the man can commit adultery, the woman can commit adultery. Both are at fault, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
So, to me, it's like, well, you've broken that contract by doing that.
very different to ancient Hebrew standards, isn't it? The culture.
Absolutely.
So being pregnant during the betrothal period, with Joseph certainly knowing it wasn't his child because they'd never slept together. In this happening with Mary, Mary was in danger of being executed. I'd never heard it put like that before, based on the Torah laws of old, which they were following, most of them. It's to the Torah of Moses. Mary was in danger of being executed. Typically, if there was sufficient cause, a betrothed husband would have given his wife a divorce document to end a betrothal. He'd been ripped off. He's probably made offerings to her father for an immaculate virgin, a spotless bride that hadn't been touched by a man, a maiden. That's what you went for in the Hebrew culture. And you find out she's pregnant. That's beyond finding out she's been with another man before. That's actually, there's proof, isn't there? So you'd be wanting out, wouldn't you? It cannot be overstated how serious it would be for a betrothed girl like Mary to become pregnant. The Mishnah in the tractate Sanhedrin calls for 4 kinds of death penalty to be administered in descending order of seriousness of the offence: stoning, burning, beheading, and strangling. A man who has sex with a betrothed woman is subject to stoning. After the girl moves in with her husband, sex between that girl and another man brings death by strangling. This was all back in their culture, of course. It shows how serious it was. Matthew clearly says that Mary's conception was a work of the set-apart Spirit. That is, it was miraculous and she had done nothing wrong. And the proof Matthew offers is that although betrothed, Mary and Joseph were not yet living together. So it's proof. They weren't living together, they weren't sleeping together. That's the proof here. So strong were Hebrew traditions in the 1st century and before about how the marriage process and timing worked that infidelity would have brought enormous shame upon the woman's father's household as well as upon the betrothed couple. So the Jews reading Matthew's story, because he's writing this for Jews, he was a Jew writing for Jews at the time to give the account of Yahusha. Yep. Jews reading Matthew's story would have immediately understood. It would only be an issue of whether they would believe that Mary was pregnant by Elohim's set-apart Spirit or not. One other matter is also claimed that thereby settled. By Jewish tradition, even though the unborn child is not Joseph's, he is the legal father. So there is no conflict should Yahusha be called a son of Joseph, for actual biological relationship is not required when the father of the family accepts a child as his own. So the next verse says that when it was clear that his betrothed was pregnant, Joseph made a decision. This is what we're going to spend a bit of time on today. Joseph made a decision not to pursue a public action, which he had the right to do, but to quietly put her away. The reason he did this is because, depending on the scripture version that you read, he was either a just man or a righteous man. Some versions say he chose to put her away quietly because he was a just man. Others say because he was a righteous man. And very often, just or righteous is defined as being kind and merciful. He decided not to drag her out and have her stoned or, accuse her father of ripping him off or anything like that because he was a just. And many people think that's because he was kind and merciful. That's not what those words mean. For Jews, just and righteous held the meaning of law-abiding, meaning being observant to the only law that mattered to the Jews, and that was the law of Moses. And this is the law they're talking about. Here is the scriptural law that addresses this situation. In Deuteronomy 22, if a girl who is a virgin is engaged to a man and another man comes upon her in the town and has sexual relations with her, you are to bring them both out to the gate of the city and stone them to death. The girl because she didn't cry out for help there in the city, and the man because he has humiliated his neighbour's wife. In this way you will put an end to the evil among you. So it might sound harsh by today's standards, like particularly if it wasn't her fault, but that's what the scripture says. And the end of the matter was, you will put an end to the evil among you. It might sound extreme, but it will put an end to the evil. If the laws were like this today, it will put a big end to a lot of the, wickedness going on. The very public nature of an execution held at the city gates was to bring maximum shame upon the criminals and their families. It is difficult to explain the extreme level of trouble this brings to a family. We must not think that shame is the same as ashamed or embarrassed as we think of it today. Shame was and remains in the Middle East a detested social status. So it's not just, oh, I'm embarrassed, look what's happened to my son, my daughter, it's embarrassing, look how it reflects on me. No, it's not that. It's a detested social status that carries on for generations. It's not just an emotion. Having gained such an undesirable status, ridding oneself or one's family of it was very difficult, and it dominated that family's daily life. Being shunned by most of the community was but the beginning. Often the only way to atone for family shame and regain family honour was to take revenge on the one who caused it, to get back your honour. We don't talk about honour much in the Western society, but in the Eastern, Middle East and Asian, other cultures like that, honour is everything. Honour. And that's the culture that the scripture was written in, this whole honour thing. So the only way to get back your honour was to win it by force, take revenge. This could go on for years and for generations. So it's interesting to just go back in time, get in our time machine, go back, be a fly on the wall and see, look into the scripture and still listen to Yahusha and say, imagine being back here and imagine just suddenly falling pregnant, never been with a man. Like, what a shock. How upsetting it is for both the man and the woman.
Well, that situation didn't change much until probably about the 1980s, 1990s, really. If you have a look at past generations, if they got pregnant out of wedlock, it brought shame to the girl, the boy, and usually the boy's family and the woman's family, but then they'd have what was called a shotgun wedding because the girl was already pregnant. So therefore, it's no different in Middle Eastern culture, for example, to Italian culture. Italian culture was exactly the same.
Absolutely. So as we discussed, Joseph, being good, righteous and obedient, he didn't want to cause Mary any public disgrace, shame or embarrassment. So he planned to divorce her secretly. So, because that was the right thing to do. And let's talk about Joseph's love. Joseph decided not to accuse his betrothed of marital infidelity, the remedy being to out her publicly. That's what the remedy of accusing her would be, to out her publicly in order to avoid himself being shamed, because people would be talking, whispering, going, oh, why didn't he end up marrying her? It's either his fault or her fault. And so he needed to out her to avoid himself being shamed. Instead of doing that, he would quietly give her a letter of divorce to Mary's father, because she was still living at home, and end the betrothal, handling the matter discreetly and privately. While one of the several purposes of Yahusha's speeches was to teach the Jewish people that while the Torah was right and good behaviour, doing obedience mechanically or woodenly, without love and without understanding the spirit of the entire Torah laws, actually perverted it. Take heed, brothers and sisters out there who are only reading the ink on the page, only quoting Torah laws and sticking them up and obeying them. Yahusha even said it himself. Who was he mainly wrestling with most of the time? Pharisees, Jews, Pharisees. Doing the Torah, even though it was right and good, definition of right and wrong. You want your definition of right and wrong, go to all the older stuff. It teaches us. But doing it mechanically or woodenly, doing it as though you lived 5,000 years ago as well, without love and without understanding the spirit of the entire Torah laws, actually perverts it. This is why when he was famously asked what the most important of all the Torah laws were, Yahusha quoted and summarized all the commands using the Shema found in Deuteronomy 6, and we know what that says. You are to love Yahuah your Elohim with all your heart, all your being and all your strength. And then he included Leviticus 19, which says, don't take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, rather love your neighbour as yourself. For I am Yahuah. So Yahusha joined these together. He summarized all the Torah and the prophets with these scriptures here. Love Yahuah your Elohim with all your heart, being and strength. Love your neighbour as yourself. See what he did? And he summarized, if you're doing this, you're completing the Torah and the prophets. Joseph understood the royal spirit within the law of Moses. He understood the spirit behind the laws, obviously, and knew that even in his gut-wrenching circumstance, he was to act in love and not vengeance, even though he was to obey the Torah. So he risked his own reputation and having shame being brought upon himself on account of his betrothed wife being pregnant without any believable explanation. He behaved exactly how Yahusha wants us to behave today. Not by ignoring Yahusha's word or commands, and not by applying our own sense of mercy or justice to any given situation, but rather by doing the 2 royal commandments of love. Because if you're doing those 2 royal commandments, there's nothing written in the text that will contradict that. No. And if it does, you're doing it wrong. Your behaviour is lacking. Yep. So Joseph, being good, righteous and obedient, didn't want to cause Mary any public disgrace, shame or embarrassment, so he planned to divorce her secretly. But no sooner had Joseph thought about this. What about that? What about how close Yahusha is? No sooner had Joseph thought about this that an angel of Yahuah came to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child inside her has been conceived by the set-apart Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you will name him Yahusha, meaning I am your deliverance. So make sure you give him that name, because he will deliver his people from their sins. It's the whole purpose for giving him that name. Yahuah, or I am your deliverance. He will deliver his people from their sins. It's the whole purpose for him coming in the flesh. Yahusha. So what about this? In a dream, the angel brought Joseph a message that had to be troubling in itself. In Yahusha's day, in the early times, divine revelations given in dreams were well accepted and not particularly unusual. We read of them in Genesis and in Daniel. We hear about them in relation to Job. It is modern skepticism and Yahusha withholding them that shuts the door to them in our time. However, there is scriptural evidence that we are currently in an era of dreams, visions, and prophesying, as Acts says. Your young women will dream dreams, and your young men will. The scriptures say that. It's available if you tap into him. Joseph was still deciding what to do when the angel tells him not to interrupt the marital process, but rather to continue on, because Mary is innocent. She has conceived a son by means of Elohim's Spirit. Joseph's first thought would not have been how that was scientifically impossible, as it is today, but rather what the meaning of such an amazing thing would be. So he wasn't thinking science, he was thinking, what does this mean? Why did this happen? Therefore the messenger tells him why. Tells him what this child will do, and that it shall be reflected in the child's name, Yahusha, which means I am your deliverance. So the reason for Yahusha's name is because he is going to deliver people from their sins. But the Jews universally believed that the hoped-for Messiah would deliver them from the oppression of the Romans. They're looking at it naturally, carnally. They wanted someone like King David to lead them into war against the Romans. The more spiritual nature of the term, as meaning deliverance from sins, had to do with being healed from sickness. Because back in that time, they believed that if you were sick or paralysed or anything, it was because of some kind of sin. They didn't know about germs or viruses, so sickness was mostly seen as punishments from Elohim. And in Yisrael, it was seen as divine consequences for disobedience to Yahuah, sinning, meaning to break the law of Moses. Plenty of examples of that in the older scriptures.
Yeah.
So,
plenty of examples of that happening in today's society. I mean,
absolutely.
A lot of people are just getting sick, and they have no idea as to why. They don't look at how they live or what they've said or what they've done They don't see it. So they're getting the consequences of their behaviours.
So he was born from the seed of Elohim. So he was perfect, because that's where the seed, the blood, and as the scripture says, the life is in the blood. So that corrupt seed that we are all born with since Adam comes into us from the sperm. It forms in us that nature. We're born with it. Babies are born. We're all born evil. We have an evil inclination, and as we learn behaviours, we just get more and more and more wicked until the effects of it eventually kills us. Yahusha was not born like that. He was born from a divine seed mixed with a human woman. So he's a new creation, a first fruit creation of which we will be transformed into one day. So he's a new species. So let's continue in Matthew 1. All this happened to fulfill what Elohim had said through the prophet. The virgin will be pregnant and will give birth to a son, and they will name him Emmanuel, which means Elohim is with us. Literally, Elohim is with us. I mean, Scripture uses the imagery of a father and a son and a spirit and a bush and flames of fire and all sorts of forms of his presence, but it actually says, it means Elohim is with us. Didn't Yahusha prove that? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father.
Yep.
He's just more proof that Elohim is with them, walking around with them. And there's an old covenant connection here. Let's bring all that Mary and Joseph are going through into a heavenly orientation as opposed to an earthly perspective. Let's look at this spiritually instead of carnally. That is, despite the terrible, difficult circumstances that the couple are facing, there is a reason for it that goes well beyond their wants and needs. It is because Elohim, through his prophets, prophesied that the Messiah would come into the world in just this way. And the precise prophecy from 700 years earlier is quoted out of the book of Isaiah. In Isaiah 7 it says, "Therefore Yahuah himself will give you people a sign. The young woman will become pregnant, bear a son, and name him Emmanuel," which means Elohim is with us. It's written right there back in Isaiah, which is back at the time of the Babylonian captivity ending. So this directly connects the old blood covenant to Mary's pregnancy. In fact, Yahusha's birth, his life, death, and resurrection are all foretold in the old scriptures. So in the new blood covenant, we have the record of the old prophecies coming to fruition. So when Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of Elohim told him, and straight away married Mary. But Joseph did not know her, because remember, the betrothal already started. They were technically married, but he did not know her, as in consummate the marriage or have sex with her, until she gave birth to their firstborn son, and he named him Yahusha. So Joseph not only heard, but also acted upon the instructions within his dream. This is the very definition of the Hebrew concept of Shema, hearing and obeying. There's no point saying you believe something if you don't do it. That's the Greek idea of belief. I just believe it. I just think of it fondly in my head. No. Hebrew concept of belief is you hear it and you do it, to prove that you don't believe it if you're not going to do it. So trust and belief is what it means. And Joseph did what he was told.
Yeah.
Despite full knowledge by Joseph that this child was not of his seed, he fully accepted Yahusha as his son. That's disappointing enough as it is when you're a first-time parent, first time being married, first time everything. It's disappointing enough to find out this child isn't going to be mine, But look what Joseph does. He has a divine encounter with Elohim and he does what he's told. This is important. He fully accepted Yahusha as his son. This is important because since Joseph is in the royal line of David, as was Mary, then Yahusha inherits the right to the throne from his legal but not biological father, Joseph. So in the end, Joseph did not issue Mary a divorce. Rather likely somewhat sooner than customary, he hurried to complete the betrothal period by having her move in with him. Yet the consummation of the union was postponed. So, as I said, there's a link under this video that you can look at the first half of this chapter if you want to look at the lineage of where Mary and Joseph both came from. both from the line of David, but also in that it proves that Yahusha was son of David and son of Abraham, proving that he was a Hebrew and proving that he was from the line of Judah, the royal kingly line. So all that stuff we covered in our last video.
Yep.
So let's look at the conclusion here. Matthew's purpose, why is Matthew telling us this? Matthew's purpose was expressly to begin his gospel by explaining who Yahusha is. He is the Messiah. He is the son of David. He is the son of Abraham, brought into this world by an otherwise nondescript, unimportant country girl. His unique conception was a direct work of Elohim and no one else. Even Yahusha's name says what he will do. See how important a name is? Particularly the power of Yahusha's name and knowing who he is. Every marital argument usually stems from either sex or money. It's true, isn't it?
Yep.
Most marital arguments either stem from sex or money. So for a bomb like adultery or breaking wedlock, for that kind of bomb being dropped on this couple so early in their relationship, Joseph shows a true behaviour of scriptural love for his wife, covering her sin, covering her crime with love, even though she was innocent. But by outward showing of what people would have been whispering and saying, he was willing to cover it. Because if she's pregnant, clearly she's the one who's wrong, isn't she? By societal standards. But he heard Elohim's voice, so he's willing to cover it, take on whatever shame there is, and marry her anyway. He covered her sin, covered her crime, even though she was innocent, by deciding to ditch her quietly until Elohim informs him of the true plan, which Joseph then hears, trusts in, acts upon in obedience, and raises a child, technically not his own, in the ways of righteous living, for the purpose of ultimate deliverance. So, look at yourself. Can we go there for our wives? Can we go there for our children? Can we go there for our friends, our neighbours, our brothers and sisters? I've got stepchildren as well. She's got stepchildren as well. We're a blended family. Can you go there for seed that's not your own? Can you go there for your family? Neighbours, brothers and sisters, can we let Yahusha's love reign within us as Yahusha desires? This is the maturity that Matthew's account of Joseph tells us. So the thing that struck me the most about this is, because we've been hearing this, if you've been in religion, you've been hearing this story for 30, 40, 50 years. And Joseph's barely ever mentioned. Somewhere along the line he dies before Yahusha's an adult, so we don't hear much about him. Joseph is not just some schmuck who plays second fiddle to Mary. It's all about Mary, isn't it? Mary, everyone raves and raves about Mary. And Joseph's not just some schmuck who plays second fiddle to Mary, the mother of Yahusha in this account. He was the husband, he was the father, he raised this child. For his loving behaviour is the real essence and core of the story. This is what real love looks like in action within our marriage, within our family life, our business, our local community. Because as Joseph did, we can know all the scripture, we can know all the Torah in our minds, but if the royal laws of Yahusha's love do not drive us to behave in the divine fruits of righteousness, then what do we really know and experience? If Joseph had just obeyed the Torah as writ, Mary would have been raising him alone, raising Yahusha alone. Joseph would have ditched. So can you see how there's the Torah law and there's the spirit of love that wrote it, and they've got to be combined.
Well, that's very true.
What do you think about that? So I can see, we've been through the ringer for years now.
Of course we have.
We haven't brought the right behaviour in. We haven't shown our children the right behaviour. We've repented and apologised many times for it. But let's move forward and we can see it's a task.
We have been doing this behaviour, really, if you look at the way both you and I have been behaving towards the kids and everything. I'd say for the last 2 or 3 months we've been showing them this love and so forth, outwardly, openly, showing them that we're here no matter what. Doesn't matter what they're doing, what they're saying. They can say whatever they like, they can do whatever they like, they can be whatever they like. We're not going to deal with that because Yahusha is.
Mm.
And we know that because we've had that from Yahusha ourselves.
Mm.
So the more that we show them that we're here, we're supporting you, we're willing to help you through whatever it is that you're going through, then I think that they can see that they're accepted by us and that they are loved.
Yeah.
So I think we've been doing that.
Mm.
What do you think?
Yeah, well, you can see this isn't first. It's not second nature to do this. It's not natural to behave like this.
No.
You behave what your rights are and what suits you, and you behave. You do what you want to do. That's what everybody does. Even people who declare Yahusha. There's got to be a real change in us to want to do this.
Yeah.
And that's what we're all seeking right now, the real, genuine change. Giving over things, surrendering things, proving ourselves to Yahusha, that you will love the person in front of you more than yourself. Isn't that what the commandment says? Isn't that what Yahusha said? Love your neighbour more than yourself. Your neighbour's whoever you're sitting opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Wife, husband, children, client. You're willing to love someone more than yourself. So this is why I like the story of Joseph, because he proved it. Even way back here, he proved that the spirit of the word is so much more important than just the letter of the law.
Yeah.
As we know, the law brings is sin and death. It's the application of it that Yahusha transformed into life by his spirit. That's long enough for this study. We're going to do this on a weekly basis and bring more scripture, and because it's all about love.
It is.
And you can't transition into Yahusha unless you're willing to die to yourself. And who's willing to do that? Who's willing to empty themselves of everything they've filled themselves with, all the habits and traditions and status that they've got? Joseph got rid of his status. He was some schmuck who married a woman who was already pregnant. He didn't care because he heard the voice of Elohim.
Yep.
You willing to go there?
Absolutely.
I'd like to encourage you, stay strong, brothers and sisters. We'll be back soon.